Hello and welcome back. In this video, we're going to do something that you do in HTML. With HTML, you first learn how to set up your first layout, and that is how your first HTML page looks. But the next step to that is to learn the About and Contacts page and how to actually link them together. And in HTML, we use a link tag and set the source attribute or the HTTP reference to the link of the page itself. And if it's on a computer, we just navigate to that file. But we're going to do that in Android. Now, Android is a little bit different. Now, if you notice, this is called main activity, right? It's an activity, so it's all contained. What if we needed to add a second page? And you know what? I'm gonna go ahead and remove these. And you can just click on these and remove them as such, right? What if we have, let's put a medium widget here, and we'll expand that to the page. So we will say fill parent. Oh no, we want match parent. And then we want, wrap content is good. Okay. But we also want a specific height. So let's go with 100 dp. That's good size. And then let's change the text to something else. We'll call this second activity. So, what's up? Hard-coded string, yeah, and we'll talk about this later on. Essentially, you should be referencing strings out of the values section found here, and that's what that warning is saying. And we'll talk about that later whenever we connect different colors and strings into our view. However, no, that's text view. I don't want text color. I want background color. Here we are. We can open up this, and let's just set it to a nice dark red. I like that red. Okay, and then we should go ahead and come down here to text color and change that to white. And then we should also change the size. And then the gravity. Text style. Text alignment, there we are. Oh, that's interesting. There we are. Okay, so now that we have that, how do we connect this to another activity? In fact, how do we make a new activity at all? Well, let's answer the first one. The first one is answered by either doing it manually, which is very long and annoying, or using our integrated development environment to do it for us. Therefore, if you come down to new, and then in IntelliJ, it's different in actual Android Studio, but in IntelliJ, it's going down to activity, and you choose which activity you want. Now, what I want is an empty activity, okay? And we'll call this second activity. Now, notice what it's doing. What it's doing is it's saying that we want to generate a layout file. We want to set the layout name to activity second. And then we want the package name to be the first application. So in other words, what we're doing is we're setting up a JavaScript file and a XML file, because you notice that main activity is not the one with the no underscore, it's the one with the underscore. So this is going to be the title of your actual JavaScript file, and this is going to be the title of your layout file. And then if you have a specific launcher activity, you connect it to that launcher activity. In this case, we don't have another launcher activity, so our default is first application, which is the title of our application. And once we click finish, that should set up another activity for us to edit. And as you can see, second activity did become the Java file, and activity second did become our lovely little second activity. Okay, so now we know how to actually set up a new activity. How do we connect the two? Well, we could just navigate to it, but do we really want to do that? No. What we want to do is we want to set it up like the CSS link. We want to be able to click on it, and whenever we click on it, we set that to the location that we want to click on. Okay? So in order to do this, we have to modify this design, because right now we can't target this. But if you think you can target this, please look at this. And oh gosh, this is horrible. This is what IntelliJ. Come on. I like you, but at least have a good coding practice. Okay, so look at this and see if there is something we can target. Alright, so in this, there's one thing that we can target. Okay, right here. That's one thing we can target. But that's not really a name that we would want to use. According to Java convention, what this would tell me is that we're targeting all text views. That's what this would tell me. However, what we want to do is we want to target second activity, right? And this is an ID. We'll be able to access this ID in just a few moments, okay? So what this is doing is it's setting an Android ID. So we're contacting the Android SDK and setting this text views attribute of ID to the ID of second activity. So what this is saying is at plus ID, so at this array of ID, we want to add second activity. So whenever the Android system on a phone reads the ID's activity, it'll notice that second activity is part of that array. Okay, so how do we target it in here? How do we actually bring this activity into here? Well, first of all, we need to set up an object. Now, believe it or not, if you know a little bit of Java, If not, I highly suggest you stop this and go learn Java. I may make a Java tutorial in the future, but you should know Java before you ever touch this. Java and XML. So what this is doing is it's saying this is an object inside of this. Okay? And that's exactly how it's treated. There's an object inside of the first application. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to set up that object. That'll probably bring up text view. There we go. And we'll call this second activity link. If I can spell correctly. Okay, so there's our text view object, and if you notice, it added from the library of widget the text view object. Okay, so that was an automatic import. If you don't have automatic import on, then you're gonna have to do this anyway. And if you don't have automatic import on, it will give you the option, it'll highlight underneath it possible libraries that you'll need. And therefore you'll be able to press Alt and Enter or something else on a Mac in order to automatically import that class. Now if you don't know which class it is, you're going to have to look up TextView and find out which tree TextView falls under to find out how to import it. Okay, now there's an important aspect here. We need to tell the main activity to find the ID. The ID is within the activity. Okay? So we literally need to find view by ID. So everything in this is a view and everything is an object. So we're literally finding a view by ID. Now, how do we actually reference that ID? Well, if you recall, and there's an example here, we go to Resources, we go to the folder, and then we go to the actual ID itself. However, because ID is its own array, we just target the ID. And as you can see, it's already come up on my ID list. Alright. Oh. And because this comes in as a view and it's not actually treated as a text view when it first comes in, we also need to cast a text view on it. And there we go. So we've now brought a usable ID into our application. However, when we click on it, it's not going to do anything. And that's because we haven't set up an on-click function. Now, in Android, setting up an on-click function is a little bit different than you would in, say, perhaps JavaScript. And this option is available us through an override. Now, if you don't know what an override is, essentially Android has a bunch of abstract classes, and on-click is part of a set of abstracts. So in order to actually access those abstracts and change their methods, because an abstract is a method that is made under the assumption that the user who's going to be using it will want to change it in the first place. Now, as you can see in the onCreate method, we actually have to override that. Well, we actually have to do that for the same thing when we first set up the onClick. And according to Java's best practices, Whenever we want to set something, we have to have a set method. Whenever we want to get something, we have to set a get method. And only when we're actually doing something with it, other than setting and getting, do we not have a set or get method. So we need to reference the second activity link, and then we pass in set onClick listener. Okay, now this is actually going to do something very important. It's going to bring up the fact that we need an onClick listener. First, we need to set the onClick listener, and we need to set the onClick listener by providing our own version of an onClick listener. So new onClick listener. And there we go. Now we have our onClick action. However, we're not quite done yet. How do we actually tell Android that we want it to do something with an ID? This is where intents come from. Now, we'll talk about this maybe in a developer talk next week, but essentially, an intent is my application intends for this to occur. Here you go, Android. Do something. That's basically what it is. Because you can have implicit and you have explicit. Now, in this one, we have explicit. And explicit means you set up an intent object, and we'll see the Alt Enter there, and we'll set up the intent with the name of link intent, and then we need to create a new intent. And first, we need to actually pass in where it's coming from, and then where it's going to. Now, this one is very simple because intents only deal with objects. So in other words, whenever we create a new intent explicitly like this, all we need to do is reference where it's coming from and where it's going. And in this case, our intent is referencing the main activity and then going to the second activity. So our main activity will be this. Okay? So in other words, we're referencing the main activity and then the context that it's in. Alright? Now we need to tell it where it's going. So we put in second activity. But here's the thing. This is the context of main activity. We don't need to tell it that it's a class because the onClick is inside the class itself. However, when we go to another class, we need to tell the onClick listener that that will be a class. It doesn't know what type it's going to be. So, we need to tell it that it's going to be a class. Alright, so what we have here is we have an intent, and it's saying we're inside this class and we want to go this class. But how do we start that? Well, it's literally in the question. Start activity. And as you can see, it only accepts an intent. And our intent is called link intent. Okay, so let's break down what's happening here. First, we're creating an object underneath text view called second activity length. We're casting the variable value of text view to the view that we find at this ID location. Then we're referencing that text view to get one of its abstract methods, the onClick. And in order to set the onClick, we have to use the set onClick listener. And this is what listens to the event that happens on an onClick. So we set onClick listener to a new version of the view.onClickListener method. And then we override the onClick, which doesn't return anything because it's void. And because it's an abstract method, we have to override it. And then we're passing in the view. Naturally, we're already passing in this view. So we set up an intent object called linkIntent that we set to new intent, and we pass the view, which is this, called main_activity, as our starting point, and we're telling it that we want it to go from here to here. Now this one is set up to layout activity main. And when it goes to here, when the onClick goes to here, because of start activity onClick linkIntent, once it goes to here, the view will change to here. Okay? Now let's go ahead and save that. And look at this final product. Alright, so when I click on this, it should go to the second activity. And there you go. Our second activity was in fact blank because I haven't put anything in it. And it has gone to the second activity. Okay, that's it for this part of the tutorial. And I'll see you next week where I might have a developer talk explaining the more intricate values of intent. But for now, if you made it this far, congratulations. And if you'd like to learn a little bit more about web development rather than Android, I'll leave a description with a link of my free web development course as well as my full stack course. Until next week, bye-bye.